The country of Portugal lies on the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula. It covers just over 35,000 square miles of land, making it around the same size as the state of Indiana. Yet this relatively small kingdom once dominated huge areas in South America, West Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Asia. Although Portugal is now best known for its food, wine, Mediterranean climate, and friendly locals, it was once responsible for beginning the Age of Exploration, which led to a multitude of atrocities, including genocide and the transatlantic slave trade. So what caused this tiny kingdom to rise to dominance and become one of the world's leading superpowers? Let's start early on with a little history lesson. The earliest humanoid remains to have been found in Portugal came from the Neanderthals, who may have arrived in the area up to 400,000 years ago. Around 5500 BCE, a Mesolithic culture emerged. Since then, the area has been inhabited and influenced by a succession of people, including Neolithic cultures from Andalusia and later the Celts, who entered the Iberian Peninsula through the Pyrenees. After the Second Punic War in the late 200s BCE, the Romans arrived in the area. However, at first they were successfully repelled by a Celtic federation called the Lusitani. After the leader of the Lusitani, named Viriathus, died, a Roman force was able to move through central Portugal and subdue the local population. Portugal was under Roman rule until the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the late 400s CE. In 406, Germanic tribes crossed the Pyrenees and settled on the peninsula. Over the next few centuries, the area continued to experience invasions from Visigoths, Muslims, and Amazighs, although Lisbon did gain independence briefly during the early 9th century. Portugal didn't officially become a nation-state until the early 1140s, when the King of Leon and Castile, Alfonso VII, officially recognized it as an independent kingdom. This act made King Alfonso's cousin, Count Afonso Henriques, the first monarch of Portugal. Henriques became King Afonso I and set about enlarging his kingdom, capturing Santarém and Lisbon in 1147. In 1179, Pope Alexander III confirmed the independence of the Kingdom of Portugal. During this time, Portugal and Spain were engaged in the Reconquista, the recapture of territories that were occupied by Muslims who had invaded the peninsula in the 8th century. The Moroccan dynasty of the Almohad attempted to push back against the new kingdom from 1179 to 1184. They were unsuccessful, and Portugal firmly established its borders by 1185, with its frontier on the Tagus River. The frontier was guarded by the Christian military order, the Templar Knights, who governed castles and territory on the border. During his reign, Afonso I began establishing rules for the new settlements. His heir, Sancho I, granted votes to many of these villages, which attracted settlers from the north who still lived in feudal communities. Muslims, although some of them were enslaved, were also enfranchised. After various skirmishes, the Reconquista was completed under the sovereignty of King Afonso III, who reigned from 1248 to 1279. Afonso III also established royal power above the church and included commoners in the Portuguese parliament, or Cortes. Afonso III's son and heir, Dinis, who ruled from 1279 to 1325, brought Portugal closer to Western Europe and strengthened the kingdom by reducing the power of the nobility and the church while improving the country's economy. He increased commerce and invested in ecological infrastructure, including planting pine trees near Leiria to hold back the advancing sand dunes. There was another motivation for cultivating pine, and that was shipbuilding. Portugal's location on the east of the unexplored Atlantic gave them a unique position, and Dinis was keen to use the sea for both protection and the extension of commerce. In 1317, Dinis enlisted a Genoese admiral named Emmanuel Pisano to help build up the Portuguese navy, and this foray into sea exploration would later become the backbone of Portugal's empire. The following century was defined by a series of disputes and alliances with Castile, England, and Spain, until John of Aviz was declared king in 1385. John was the illegitimate son of King Pedro I and saved Portugal from coming under Castilian rule after the death of his half-brother Ferdinand. Ferdinand had engaged in a rivalry with the ruler of Castile, Henry II, which resulted in the Portuguese heiress being married to Henry II's son, John. When Ferdinand died in 1383, his Castilian son-in-law insisted he be named the King of Portugal. This move resulted in civil unrest, which John of Aviz capitalized on, forcing Ferdinand's widowed queen to flee to Castile. John was elected king in 1385, and was crowned King John I of Portugal. Although many of the nobility favored Castilian succession, the merchants and trade guilds backed him. John's victory at the Battle of Aljubarrota in 1385 secured his crown and Portugal's independence. Portugal's first proper foray beyond the shores of the Iberian Peninsula came in 1415, when the Portuguese fleet crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and captured the Moroccan port of Ceuta. Many cite this victory as the beginning of Portugal's age of expansion. Over the next few centuries, Portugal would be catapulted onto the world stage, building an empire that stretched from the Americas to Japan. John I's son, Henry, is often seen as the instigator of Europe's age of exploration. Dubbed Henry the Navigator, he didn't actually embark on many overseas expeditions himself, but he passionately funded voyages along the western coast of Africa, determined to exploit sources of gold, spices, and enslaved people for the profit of Portugal. He had been part of the invasion of Ceuta, which had given him a glimpse of the bustling and profitable trade between the North African Muslims, the West Africans, and the Indians. Not only did these exotic lands spark his interest in exploration, but he was drawn to the rich resources of these lands. Henry also wanted to spread Christianity and establish colonies on islands where the underexploited resources could also add to Portugal's riches. Raised on tales of the Crusades, Henry justified his ambitions as an extension of the crusading tradition and hoped to find the kingdom of the legendary Prester John, a mythical Christian king whose kingdom was thought to be in Africa or Asia. Henry's wanderlust by proxy may have been inspired by his brother, Pedro, who traveled throughout Europe and brought and translated a copy of Marco Polo's travels for Henry. To fund his missions, he enlisted Portugal's merchant class, including a prominent Jewish community, and also sourced money from the Christian church. Although Henry wanted to expand Christianity, he knew and valued the knowledge of Jewish and Muslim scholars, basing his geographic knowledge on the works of Ptolemy and Arab scholars. He assembled a team of mariners, ship designers, astronomers, mathematicians, cartographers, and navigators to help him fulfill his ambitions. This diverse group allowed for the exchange of ideas, techniques, and tools that would become essential for navigating into the unknown. At some point in the early 1400s, Portuguese sailors came across the Azores archipelago. Some historians attribute Diogo Silvas as the first Portuguese sailor to land in the Azores in 1427, while others state it was Velo Cabral in 1432. The Portuguese began establishing settlements on the islands between 1439 and 1444, and soon the Azores became a vital stopping point for the Portuguese explorers. All this voyaging cost a lot of money, and Henry was keen to supplement Portuguese funding with West African gold. However, the West Africans were understandably very protective and secretive about the whereabouts of their gold deposits. So, Henry decided to exploit a more readily accessible resource: enslaved people. The Portuguese began raiding settlements and kidnapping locals on the island of Arguin, taking them to Lisbon. The trade of enslaved people grew exponentially, and in 1448, a fort, a warehouse, and a trading station were built on an island near the coast of modern-day Mauritania to facilitate this trade. The Portuguese sold enslaved people to raise funds and use them on plantations as free labor. In the 1450s, enslaved Africans were forced to build and maintain sugar plantations on the Portuguese archipelago of Madeira. This blueprint was so successful that the Portuguese would go on to use the system of focusing on a single cash crop throughout their colonies. By the time of Henry's death in 1460, the Portuguese had reached as far as the modern region of Sierra Leone and established successful colonies on the Azores, Porto Santo, and Madeira. After Henry's death, sea trade in Europe was flourishing, and the European countries were desperate to be the first to find a water route to India. In 1488, Portugal funded Bartholomew Diaz's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, although he ultimately turned back before he reached India. Back in Lisbon, Diaz shared tales of his nautical adventure in front of an audience in the court of King John II of Portugal. A Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus heard about these stories. Columbus tried to persuade King John to fund an expedition west to find a viable sea route to the Indies. John dismissed Columbus's idea, as the king correctly surmised that Columbus's calculations on the size of the world were wrong. Columbus's workings were not only faulty, but based on an incorrect measure for a mile. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, there was an entire continent that would save Columbus's expedition from being a complete and total disaster. Although Portugal had rejected Columbus's proposal, they were still in a position to profit from his success. Upon Columbus's return, Spain and Portugal met to discuss how they would divide the so-called New World between them. The agreement was finalized by the Treaty of Tordesillas, in which a line was drawn, with Spain claiming all the lands west of the line and Portugal getting control of the lands to the east, disregarding the native inhabitants, which at the time may have numbered around 50 million or more. Of course, the other European colonial powers completely ignored the Treaty of Tordesillas and began their own expeditions to exploit the Americas. Sending expeditions to America did not stop the Portuguese from seeking another route to India. In 1497, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama embarked on a voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, eventually reaching modern-day Kozhikode in India in May of 1498. The success of his route led to the Portuguese establishing a network of trading posts in eastern Africa and India, violently subduing the local populations as needed. Further expeditions east to Indonesia in 1512 and China in 1514 brought a wealth of goods and spices through Portugal's now bustling ports. Soon, Portugal was the most prosperous nation in the world, and the small country became the world's first global empire. The beginning of the end of Portugal's dominance came in 1522, when one of Magellan's ships came back to Spain after circumnavigating the seas. Magellan, a Portuguese explorer, followed Columbus's footsteps when the Portuguese king Manuel I rejected his proposal to take a westward route to Indonesia and instead received funding from Spain. As other colonial powers rose to prominence, Portugal's influence slowly waned. A further loss of status and wealth came in 1755 when an earthquake destroyed Lisbon. The Napoleonic Wars followed this natural disaster in the early 1800s, and Portugal's Brazilian colony declared its independence in 1822. The loss of Portuguese power and influence was evidenced by the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885. During the conference, Africa was divided between the European powers, with Britain and France taking the lion's share. In 1910, the monarchy was deposed in a revolution, and a succession of repressive governments took over the rule of the country. In 1974, a left-wing military coup resulted in democratic reforms, and in 1975, Portugal granted independence to their African colonies. The Portuguese Empire finally came to an end in 1999, when it transferred the sovereignty of Macau over to China. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the history of Portugal, check out our book, History of Portugal, a captivating guide to Portuguese history from ancient times to the present. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.